I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and today we're here in Frankfurt to drive a pretty long-awaited new version of the Mazda 3. It's the one with the Skyactiv-X engine. Skyactiv-X is a new iteration of petrol engine technology from Mazda. The Japanese company have been talking about this near mythical powertrain for several years now, but it is ready for production. So what does X mean? Essentially, what Mazda are doing is they're combining aspects of petrol technology and diesel technology to create kind of new internal combustion experience, which brings fuel economy down. Mazda say it brings emissions down, which is very important in emissions-driven markets like this one I'm in here in Europe. That's less important back in Australia, but what really does matter, I think, to all of us is that the internal combustion engine, is prolonged. Electric cars are all the rage everywhere you look these days, but Mazda are standing fairly alone in talking about sort of total energy use. If you're plugging an electric car into a wall socket that starts a coal-fired power plant somewhere, you're not actually doing that much good. Instead, technologies like Skyactiv-X are designed to bring emissions down while retaining the characteristics that people like us love about combustion vehicles. So Mazda say that the 3 revs out like a petrol engine while offering that low-down torque like a diesel through its new spark-controlled compression ignition system. Compression ignition is, of course, a hallmark of diesel engines. Spark plugs are a hallmark of petrol engines. We're going to find out how they work together when we take this 3 out onto the roads here around Frankfurt. But before we do that, let's chat about some specifics pertaining to the Mazda 3 Skyactiv-X. First of all, how will you be able to tell that this one is the special Mazda 3? Well, there are only 2 ways. The first is the Skyactiv-X badge on the back. That replaces the Skyactiv-G badge on the standard petrol 2 and 2.5 litre versions back home. The second thing is a real train spotter's delight. It's that the twin exhaust pipes on the back of the 3 Skyactiv-X look slightly different, and those pipes sound just like this. So I think you'll agree it's not exactly a performance car engine note. That might be left up to a potential future hypothetical Skyactiv-G turbo Mazda 3. I know you guys down in the comments are obsessed with the idea of that happening, and keep saying it because it may convince Mazda. And while you're down there, make sure you hit subscribe and that notification bell and you'll never miss one of our full-length, highly detailed Australian video car reviews. Now, as for outputs from this 2-litre Skyactiv-X engine, Mazda Australia haven't confirmed the precise figures yet because of testing still ongoing with the fuel that we have back in Australia, but they're likely to be similar to the European outputs of 132 kilowatts and 224 newton meters of torque. For a full view of what the new Mazda 3's interior is like, you can find really long and detailed content that we've shot on that in the past by clicking up here in the top right-hand corner. But suffice to say, the 3 Skyactiv-X's interior remains one of the best, if not the best, in the small car class, with soft touch materials everywhere, a gorgeous steering wheel, pretty easy to use infotainment, and a generally elegant and upmarket demeanor. It's just that the ones that come to Australia will have their steering wheel on the correct side. So the question we've all been waiting for so long with Skyactiv-X is, what is it like to drive? And we are actually the very first in the world to drive this engine, which I think is a big deal, and it's a real testament to all the help you guys have given me over the years with subscribing and commenting and interacting on this channel. So thank you for that. And as a result, we get to talk about what this car is like on the road. Now, the vehicle I'm driving now is a near production version, so it's not quite finished, but it's almost there. And we're able to take a lot of insights from what this one is like to drive. So first of all, the outputs. We've got about 132 kilowatts of power and 224 newton meters of torque. So what that does tell you right off the bat is that it's not a performance car. There may be a hot hatch version of the Mazda 3 that comes out later with a sort of standard combustion petrol with a turbocharger, maybe not. Mazda are keen to downplay that rumor actually at the moment. The Skyactiv-X is actually instead about turning mainstream motoring into a smoother and more economical experience. And what it does is it blends, the traditional spark plug driven petrol engine with the compression ignition of a diesel, And although it switches between those two on the fly, you cannot tell when that's happening in the 3. There's a little graphic in the touchscreen in the center that tells you when it's happening, but if you didn't have that switched on, you would just never know. It's that smooth. The end result is that the car, without the aid of a turbocharger, feels torquier at low revs, but if you rev it right out, it still offers that, sort of zingy, high revving, strong petrol feel. So we're running in a high gear at the moment, and at low revs, you can feed in a little bit of throttle. There's good throttle response. You feel a stronger amount of torque than the standard Skyactiv-G engine, coming on, I reckon, around 3,000 RPM. So it's certainly not as torquey down low as a turbocharged 1.4, 1.6, 2 litre like a Volkswagen engine, but it does have better drivability than the standard Mazda engines. And then at high RPM, it revs out like a petrol. It's not like the MX-5's 2 litre tune, which, it wants to be playing at high revs all the time and it rewards you for that. Instead, what you find is the Skyactiv-X kind of does its best work around that sort of 3,000 to 4,000 RPM mark, but it offers considerably more torque than Mazda's standard combustion petrols at lower revs than that as well. And of course, that's the territory you're playing in when you're just driving around the suburbs, driving around town. So ultimately, when you're just driving around town, it's more drivable, it's torquier, and it's significantly quieter than the 2 or the 2.5 litre Skyactiv-G. And I think that's going to make a big difference for a lot of people. And then when you're driving athletically, it wants to rev out, but it's certainly no faster than the 2.5 litre, I don't think. And Mazda are saying that they're actually not sure if the 0 to 100 time is going to be any quicker. So, as I said, it's not about performance, it's about the character of how the thing gets down the road. And ultimately, it just feels more drivable, smoother, quieter, more refined. So what does that really mean? Well, in one sort of aspect, it is a big development for the combustion engine. Mazda is the first company to develop a production version of a petrol engine that incorporates compression ignition, and a far more lean burn in the engine, and they've managed to do that without sort of significant pinging or any strange or awkward transition between spark and compression ignition, and that's a big deal. What it does is it brings your everyday fuel consumption down. So on a loop here in Frankfurt that's involved country driving, suburban driving, and a stretch on the Autobahn without a speed limit, we actually managed about 7.2 litres per 100, which is low. I'm going to go ahead and say that's sort of 10% lower than what you'd be able to get from a low-blow turbocharged engine in this segment, and it's doing it without the aid of forced induction, and that's a big deal. On the other hand, it doesn't feel revolutionary on the road, and that is kind of the point. This isn't meant to feel like a science experiment, it's just meant to feel like an efficient, smooth, quiet petrol engine, and it does. The other classic characteristics of the Mazda 3 are all the same. It has a nice resolved suspension tune, it's comfortable, especially here on European roads, which don't have anywhere near the sort of pockmarks that you get back in Australia. The steering is nice and quick, and the whole chassis feels, relatively sporty without sacrificing comfort in town. It's just that now Mazda have an engine for this thing that feels on a par with the Volkswagen 1.4 TSI, I would say. No better necessarily, but certainly on a par. And given that the Volkswagen engine has been, widely acclaimed as the best in this segment for a long time, it's a big deal that Mazda are now playing in that kind of level of petrol engines. So those are my first impressions of the Mazda 3 with the Skyactiv-X engine. I think this is a really important development for combustion, as Mazda and other car makers aim to develop what they see as the ideal internal combustion engine, something that can prolong this fun-to-drive technology into the future alongside alternative fuel sources. Now, it'll be important to drive this car back in Australia to see how it feels on our local roads, but on those first impressions, it's certainly a very, very impressive car with an impressive engine technology under the bonnet.